Welcome to this Supranational criminal law lecture entitled The ICC in the Chinese Context, Perception and Prospects. My name is not Naya Matthews, my name is Claire Giraudet. I am the Communications and Program Assistant for the Coalition for the International Criminal Court. The Coalition is a network of over 2,500 NGOs in 150 countries. We work together to ensure a fair, effective, and universal ICC, to make justice visible, and to ensure a greater access to justice for victims of international crimes. This lecture series has been organized since 2003 by the Coalition, the Asser Institute, and the Grotius Center of Leiden University. So it is my great pleasure to introduce tonight's guest. Michael Liu is a civil party lawyer in the extraordinary chambers in the courts of Cambodia, and he also teaches international law at the Royal University of Law and Economics in Cambodia. In the past, Michael has also worked for the International Committee of the Red Cross and the ICC. He holds an LLB and LLM from Renmin University of China, and he has been a member of the All China Bar Association of the People's Republic of China since 2010. And finally, Mr. Liu is also the founder and the Secretary General of the Chinese Initiative on International Criminal Law, which was launched last year on International Justice Day. The CIICJ is an independent NGO mandated to promote a better understanding of international criminal law in the greater Chinese region. So a little bit of background on tonight's lecture. China has recently made the news when, along with Russia, it vetoed the referral of the situation in Syria to the ICC. There is no denial that China is a key international player. It's the most populated country in the world. It's a major economic power, and is also a permanent member of the UN Security Council. And yet, China remains out of the Rome Statute system of international justice. By joining the ICC, China would not only threaten the global representation within the International Criminal Court, but will also extend the protection guaranteed by the rule of law to all Chinese people. So China's reluctance to join the ICC raises questions about how the ICC and international law in general is perceived in the country, and how negative perceptions can be tackled, and what are the prospects in the future. So to answer those questions, I now give the floor to Michael.
Thanks, Claire, for the kind introduction. Indeed, we're a member of the coalition, which we're really proud. I had the idea of founding a Chinese NGO to promote international law, international criminal law in China, because in 2012, 2 years ago, I was working in the Khmer Tribunal. There was an event, and the Asia Pacific coordinator at that time, Evelyn, walked to me after the event and asked me what I can do to promote international criminal court in China. So I was inspired by the coalition at the very beginning. So it's very nice to be introduced by our coalition staff today on this very interesting lecture. I should say good evening to everyone. First of all, thank you all for coming. Today the World Cup is against us, but you still showed the interest of this very interesting topic. That means we're the hardcore of international law, and probably China. I have come to Asser Institute several times during my various stays in The Hague, including intern for the International Criminal Court before. It's my first time to speak here, so it is really my honor to speak here with extraordinary audience like the one sitting in front of me. Today the topic I'm going to cover is the International Criminal Court in Chinese context, perceptions and prospects. This is a huge topic, of course, and I'm sure someone can write a PhD on it. It's almost impossible to cover within 1 hour. What I will do is, because I know some of you before, but I don't know most of you. I don't know your interest or your prior knowledge on this issue. What I will try to do is try to be precise in my presentation. I will spend around 30 minutes, and you can ask me the questions afterwards. If you don't understand some of the points I'm saying, feel free to interrupt me. I won't be offended. As Claire introduced, I'm a lawyer from China originally. I studied international law before in China. A side note, my law school, Renmin University, ranks #1 by our Ministry of Education. So I studied international law back then. I always wanted to be a Chinese lawyer in those international tribunals. I seen the different lawyers from all over the world wearing the robes. Why not one from China? There's already enough diplomats and students in those international tribunals. So that's the initial career goal I had, to be a lawyer working in those international tribunals. Right now, I'm a victim lawyer in the Cambodia Tribunal, as Claire introduced. I also teach international human rights law and international criminal law in the Royal University of Law and Economics in Cambodia. In the meantime, while working in those international tribunals, I have seen the strength of the civil society in pursuing the cause of international justice. Again, I see a few Chinese participation, and I feel that it's my mandate to do something to change. So I founded this NGO, Chinese Initiative on International Criminal Justice, to promote a better understanding of international law and international justice in China. Where I put some introduction of our organization and souvenir of our organization at the back on the table over there. Feel free to take some when you walk out of the room later. So enough of self-propaganda. I will first move on in this 30 minutes I have. I will first try to cover the perceptions on this topic, China and ICC, and then move to the prospects. Any starting point on the discussion any discussion on the issue of International Criminal Court in China, the starting point is usually China's vote in the Rome Diplomatic Conference. I see Judge Liu just walk in, who was participating in the Rome Diplomatic Conference, so I'll be much reserved making comments on that. But it's a common knowledge that everyone knows that China voted against the Rome Statute at the end of the Rome Diplomatic Conference. If we check from the official record of the negotiation, there's a couple of reasons put forward for this vote by the Chinese delegation. I will go over some of these points in more details in a minute. But no matter how we take it, having to accept a thing, the International Criminal Court, designed in a fashion that it does not design at the beginning, I think that poses a challenge to China. So the perception I will go on with is, as I see is, the International Criminal Court poses a challenge to the state. I will use 3 thematic issues, which lies the core of International Criminal Court's raison d'être, to elaborate further this challenge. These thematic issues are jurisdiction, the immunity of head of state, and the Security Council's role vis-à-vis International Criminal Court. Starting from the jurisdiction, even before the Rome Diplomatic Conference, at the International Law Commission's discussion, when contemplating whether to have a Rome Conference or even before, it was clear Beijing preferred to have an International Court of Justice model jurisdiction. That is, a participation in the court does not result in accepting the jurisdiction. From the Chinese official position, they preferred this position because they can result this mechanism can result in maximum participation of the International Criminal Court, and that in turn can achieve the universality, which is a principle of the International Criminal Court. That is a very smart argument, I think. It has its legitimacy in there. But a side note is China has consistently made reservations of all international conventions to the effect that it does not avail itself from the jurisdiction of any international institutions. So here we have our consistent state practice of not preferring to accept the jurisdiction of any kind. I think it does not surprise many people when the majority of the state at the Rome Diplomatic Conference goes ahead with this jurisdiction arrangement, that China wasn't ready to sign up for it. The second issue I think I would like to discuss share with you is the immunity of the head of the state. Interesting enough, the head of the state's immunity was not mentioned by the Chinese delegation or challenged by the Chinese delegation during the Rome Diplomatic Conference. Maybe they accept that this is already an existing international law to have the head of state adjudicated by an international court of some kind. But there's always a suspicion outside China and inside China, of course, that China disassociates itself from the International Criminal Court out of the fear of prosecution of its head of state. I think that's a well-founded suspicion. Any policy of a state like China, this size and well-organized in nature, can easily qualify it as a widespread or systematic state practice. So there is our suspicion on that. The immunity of head of states is China's key concern, even though it wasn't put forward in the Rome Statute, the Rome Diplomatic Conference. But I also want to share one of the other points with you is, I think there's not only political considerations in this arrangement, but also culturally it's difficult for Chinese to accept the head of states to be adjudicated by a court of law. When we're discussing the topic of this lecture with the coalition, the coalition suggested the topic of International Criminal Court and China. I changed this topic into International Criminal Court in Chinese context because I believe this will more reflect what I want to share with everyone. It's not only about the politics, it's also about the culture, how Chinese, in the Chinese context, how the International Criminal Court has been perceived. Every law school student in China have to choose one subject, which is called legal history of Chinese legal tradition. There is one principle in the Chinese legal tradition. It is called 刑不上士大夫. If I translate literally for you, is penalties does not apply to mandarins. The mandarins means the state officials. The historians will explain this in more details. That this term does not mean the penalty itself does not apply to mandarins, but the corporate punishment does not apply to mandarins, the state officials. But I think inherently this principle more or less illustrated the perception in Chinese context that the punishment, criminal punishment, or certain kind of criminal punishment does not go to the state head of state's level. So immunity of head of state, I think that itself poses a challenge to the state, both politically and culturally. The third thematic issue on the perceptions, Security Council's role vis-a-vis International Criminal Court. China deeply appreciates its role in the Security Council. We have the veto powers there. It was a hard-fought battle to get back that seat from the Republic of China, Taiwan. So everyone in China more or less knows that we have a very important role in the Security Council, and we deeply appreciate its role in our role in the Security Council, and also the United Nations Charter surrounded around the Security Council, this collective mechanism. Our strong International Criminal Court will potentially dilute the role of the Security Council or the United Nations in the international affairs. That does not always happen. It does not necessarily result in this way, but at least that is a potential. So that is a broader picture of the Security Council's role vis-à-vis ICC. The China appreciate the Security Council's role, and with our new institution surfacing, I think that is a challenge itself. This is more than evidence when it comes to the crime of aggression. From Beijing's perspective, this alleged erosion on the Security Council's role on the determination of aggression. This is only alleged erosion, I said, but this is purely unacceptable. I think for China, they prefer to have the Security Council have an almost exclusive role on fighting their aggression. I have heard the representatives of the state voice these concerns a few times on the relation between the Security Council and the International Criminal Court, specifically with regards to the crime of aggression. Given the rest of the issues, like the immunity of the head of the state and the jurisdiction is more or less settled with the Rome Statute and other rules, I think in the future, this will be the key concern of China in the coming years. Yes, that's the three thematic issues I'd like to cover to explain this perception of ICC being a challenge to the state at the beginning. I have shared the perception with you, like ICC was perceived as a challenge more or less, but yet this is not to be disappear when we come to the discussion on ICC and China. Challenge always brings two opportunities. In the Chinese word, crisis, weiji, it inherently has twofold of meanings. It has two characters, so it has two meanings. One is danger, one is opportunities. So sharing with after sharing with the perceptions, I will now move on to the prospects. What can we expect in the future on the ICC and China? I have come to four conclusions through my observations on this issue. The first, there will always be resounding interest of International Criminal Court in China from all walks of life. The second, the International Criminal Court is viewed as part of a broader international politics. With the International Criminal Court become more and more integrated into the international affairs, it will be more and more relevant to China. The third one, with Chinese diplomacy getting growingly sophisticated, I think ICC has a higher chance to be utilized by China, to be included as part of the state diplomacy, which is not the case for now. Fourth, ensuring the International Criminal Court on a moral high ground is key to success when it comes to relations between the ICC and China. I will go over those four prospects one by one now. First, there will always be a resounding interest of International Criminal Court in China. Many people ask me when I explain to them I try to promote International Criminal Court in China or international justice in China. The first question is, are they bothered? The perception, I guess, is China is not participating, therefore there is a lack of interest in International Criminal Court. But I can assure you my experience is the Chinese officials, academics, and students study the International Criminal Court meticulously. In 2012, I was invited to join ICC 10 years anniversary conference in Beijing. A group of diplomats and academics sitting together to share their views on International Criminal Court. I was really shocked by the knowledge of the Chinese authorities on the issues of International Criminal Court. For me, the most impressive speaker in that conference was not those speakers from academic circles, but from the officials from the Chinese authorities. They really knows the court inside and out, and have a very deep understanding of all the issues of the court and even some of the frontier issues. One of the activities we do in our CIICJ is to produce a monitoring report of all these international tribunals, International Criminal Court being one of them. It has been very well received. People even come to ask us, when will you guys produce the next issue? I'm saying like these are from all walks of life, state officials, the student and academics. I was really again surprised by the passion of the Chinese on international, from a different type of Chinese. I mean, working on different walks of life. They're enthusiasts of International Criminal Court. Another example I can give it to you. I'm here in town this time is to organize the International Criminal Court, Chinese moot court, a moot court whose final will be inside the International Criminal Court. There were 13 universities in China participated. That plus those Chinese universities participated in the English language version. I think China produced the most teams in this moot court competition. That all in all gives you a nutshell how the Chinese have a resounding interest in the International Criminal Court. I try to rationale this thing. If you're not participating, why you're having this interest, especially if you compare the interest of China to those state parties of International Criminal Court. The level of interest I see in China and among the Chinese audience even higher than some of the state parties. I think the conclusion I come is this is more or less culturally it's more or less culturally China has to be the center of the world for the Chinese. The word China in Chinese is 中国. That translates literally again is Middle Kingdom. When you're calling yourself the Middle Kingdom, you have to assert yourself is actually in the center stage of the world affairs. Even though when there is an International Criminal Court, you're not participating, it is still relevant to keep yourself, have the self-image of in the center of the world. So that's the first prospect I want to share with everyone is there will always be a resounding interest of International Criminal Court in China from different parts of the different walks of life, in different professions. The second is International Criminal Court will always viewed, I shouldn't say always, things might be changed, but at least from what I gathered is for most of the people, International Criminal Court is viewed as a broader, part of the broader international politics. I'm a big advocate for International Criminal Court. I worked here before. I really believe in the values and the principles the International Criminal Court stands for. But it has been difficult for me to advocate that in China, to share that, to make that the values and the principle of the International Criminal Court, to make that argument, it has been less convincing for the Chinese audience. Most of the Chinese audience, I guess, they are less affected by the atrocities. Most of the atrocities that ICC covered is in Africa or Latin America or Eastern Europe. They're more or less remotely located compared to the affected communities. There's no colonial histories. At least from our perspective, we don't have a colonial history in Africa. And the Chinese press does not report negatively like the West. So we're more or less not really aware of these atrocities. So that's a couple of reasons I identified why the values and the principles the court stand for is less convincing for the Chinese audience, and why ICC is always viewed as a part of broader international politics. An example I can give it to you on the ICC being perceived as a part of politics is the Security Council's referral to the International Criminal Court. There at least have been 3 situations where the Security Council tried to refer the situation to the International Criminal Court. In Libya, in Sudan, and in Syria. China has voted 3 times, but 3 times were different. China voted for 1, Libya, abstaining 1 in Sudan, and vetoed 1, the one in Syria. I don't know why the reasons behind the authorities when they come to make this decision. But at least for my observation is this decision is not necessarily depends on the gravity of the situation on the ground or the need for international criminal courts to intervene in that situation. it's really based on the geopolitics considerations. Which one is more convenient? Which one is more necessary? Which one is not acceptable for the Chinese politic interest? But having said that, we can only work with the reality. We can only work with the reality. I think with the International Criminal Court more and more integrated into the international affairs, the court itself will be more and more relevant to audience in China. And when the court was deliberating on the situations in Sudan, I see very little public debate in China why China voted taking that vote. There's a very little public discussion. I shouldn't say little. There are still public discussions, but making a comparison between then and now, the situation in Syria where China voted against it, I think there is a wider audience now on this issue. Like more, I see more discussions on this issue, whether no matter people agree with this vote or disagree with this vote, I see more interest. Again, because ICC is becoming more and more relevant to Chinese audience. The third prospect I want to share with you is, I think with the Chinese diplomacy getting growingly sophisticated, ICC will have a higher chance to be included in the part of the state's diplomacy. Right now, more or less China is observing what the ICC is doing. It does not really consider ICC as some part of the broader picture of its diplomacy. I might not be aware of some of the details, but at least I think the broader picture is International Criminal Court is still irrelevant when it comes to the state diplomacy. I'm an idealist. I think China is a great power. It's a superpower. It should stand for what ICC stands for, but that's not always shared by people. I sometimes find myself making that argument alone. States tend to use international law and international organizations for its own interest. This is not only for China, but also for other countries, and it's also for it's more so for the big state powers like like the United States or Russia. The smaller states tends to believe international law will hold up their interest and therefore tends to be more engaged with international law itself. But be it as it may, that brings us to separate questions. What is state interest of China, and will ICC advance China's state interest? It will be great if China's state interest includes the prevention of atrocities any part in the world. It will be great if China make it clear to everyone international justice is part of the state interest. Every time we have my organization have some events with the Dutch embassy, the ambassador will come out and explain to us why the Netherlands is interested in this, because the Dutch constitution provides that the Netherlands will support international law and order. I wish there would be someday China would do the same. But so far, the core interest of the state, as explained by the state authority, is the territorial integrity, the national unification, the stability of the political system and social order within China, and the sustainable development of the state. So, at least in the core interest level, China is not, the International Criminal Court does not concern China's state interest that much. But will ICC advance China's state interest, even though this core interest does not include international justice? It's difficult to find an entry point for the state interest to concerned. My argument is the International Criminal Court is forging peace and a better world through justice. And that's why China should get on board with it. China for sure speak from bottom of my heart, and also someone not from the authority. They want peace and a better world. But something maybe the country is not sure is if it's best to achieve this through international justice. This is a reflection of domestic issues. China wants peace or stability within the country. but they're not sure if that is achieved through justice, a proper rule of law, or how to achieve through the justice and a rule of law. With that in mind, I think in the future there will be a likelihood of China getting more interested in what International Criminal Court is doing, because China's interest in the world they really have a global interest. China either is the #1 or the #2 investor in Africa. I was really surprised. I was in South Sudan last year. I was really surprised how many Chinese you have in that country in the middle of nowhere, no offense. But it's really surprising to see how many Chinese investment and Chinese nationals are in that country. To use the International Criminal Court to preserve a peace in those countries where China have little means to assert the peace and stability. I think that might be one of the state policies in the future. There is a very fortunate news I just heard. Maybe that will create more hopes in the future. China has been sending peacekeeping troops around the world, but the policy has always been we're only sending the constructing workers. But now it has changed. China for the first time sent combatant troops in the peacekeeping troops in Africa. So more or less they're increasingly interested in using international organizations or international laws to advance its state agenda. I think in the future there might be a chance that International Criminal Court can be more relevant to the Chinese diplomacies. The last prospects I want to share with you is ensuring the ICC, International Criminal Court, on the moral high ground is a key to the success on the relation between International Criminal Court and China. You might not want to believe, or you will be surprised, is in China, the state or the authorities, at least, they always consider itself better than the rest of the world, better than the rest of the old superpowers, that is the West. They always use the state media to explain why they are better. That is actually one of the reasons it considers itself, it chooses to distance itself from the proactive participation in the international organizations, because it was not sure if those international organizations are good for all, or it was only good for the Western's agenda. That's the same with ICC. I think. Well, I said that this is the state or authorities' perspective. They think themselves are better than the rest of the world. I think this is also true from the ordinary Chinese perspective. I don't want to be nationalities on this, but there's always a shared belief among the Chinese community that China has to take the lead in the world, like it did in the past, in the history. And it has to take the lead in the world affairs and being respected as such. So in that, I think the state authorities and the Chinese agree with each other on that. The China have to play a better role, different from the past, different from others. So convincing the Chinese audience that the International Criminal Court is on the moral high ground is a key to the success in the Chinese context. You really have to show the people that International Criminal Court is doing a good job to promote the benefit of everyone, people in Africa, people in Europe, and the Chinese themselves. Personally, I literally cannot think of any reasons that the Chinese, being intellectual, hardworking, and well organized, should stay away from the international justice. But that's the situation at hand. From my perspective, I think when you have a perceived conflict or a dispute, I said perceived conflict or dispute, I don't think these two are necessarily conflicting with each other, international justice and Chinese participation. So when you have a perceived conflict of dispute, that means you don't have a good lawyer to figure out the solution. That's why I'm here. That is my mission. So that concludes the 4 prospects I want to bring with you. The first is there will always be enough interest in ICC in China. ICC will always be as a part of the broader international politics, and with ICC being more integrated into international affairs, it will be more and more relevant to China. Third one, there will be a higher chance in the future ICC will be included as a part of the state diplomacy, and ensuring ICC on the moral high ground is a key to success when it comes to the relationship between ICC and China. That concludes the perceptions and perspectives. I'm about to arrive at 30 minutes. The last thing I want to share with everyone is you really have to invest into these things, and you will be surprised. When I first studied this organization, Chinese Initiative on International Criminal Justice, I can tell you how I was really scared I would be arrested or something. But but now our event is now supported by, sometimes our event is supported by the Chinese authorities. That purely was unthinkable for me even. Someone founded this organization 2 years ago. So I want to share that with you as well, that if you keep trying, China will always surprise you. At least from my experience, I believe so. Okay, with that, I conclude my presentation of 30 minutes. I will open the floor for questions.
Thank you, Michael, for this very interesting presentation and for sharing with us your views and your knowledge of China's views on the ICC, and for putting forward suggestions to improve the relationship. So yeah, now I'm going to open the floor to questions from the audience. I'm going to take maybe 2 or 3 questions in a row, and then Michael will answer them, and then we can take another row of questions. Yes?
I'm just curious. I wonder if you have the liberty to tell us which Chinese authority is supporting your initiative. I'm asking because I know there are political conflicts within the Communist Party, so maybe you're getting support from one authority, but not on another, which can tell which part within the Chinese Communist Party is supporting the initiative. Right. If it's a secret, it's all right. But
No.
Anybody else? Maybe you can introduce yourself before asking your question.
Yeah, I'm Yudan Tan. I'm studying in United University, majoring in international criminal law, and I just wondering, like, the challenges you expect about the cultural perspective about the suspicion of the immunity of the head of state. And so I want to say that you said there is a like cultural tradition that the punishment should not be to offer to the higher officials, but I think another Chinese thing, like, if the prince also commits crimes, he should be punished. So I think the cultural perspective, there is some missing ideas. So I think maybe the culture is not a challenge for the Chinese people to accept this immunity of the state, of head of state.
Thank you. Yes?
You said that now there's a wider audience also because of your organization. I was just wondering if you could go into specific details as to what civil society is doing in China right now and the specific projects that you've launched to make it happen and how successful they've been.
Okay, yeah, sure.
Okay, first of all, I'm very glad that my compatriots from China are very active on this to ask the questions. I always believe our success relies on the interest from China, so I really appreciate your questions. The first question, yes, I will have the liberty. We're mostly cooperating with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. That's one of the principles we have as an organization. We're trying to be transparent as much as we can, so we don't hide anything. I think the ministry itself, of course, we have to cooperate with them through our partners, like for example, the Beijing University or other international criminal courts. It's not. I'm saying like their support is not unqualified, but you're right. There are different domestic politics when it comes to international law or international criminal court in general. I found it very. It's very challenging for me to work in that context as well to deal with different people, but you will always be surprised how much you can achieve when you approach those people. I think one of the things, one of the, how do I say, one of the weakness in the past is there's not enough advocates for the court or for the cause in China. You can always read the news from the Western media or from the Western diplomats telling them the International Criminal Court is different. International Criminal Court is good. But when you hear from the Chinese perspectives, people like me who grew up in China, who worked in these courts, and who still speak on behalf of those courts, or the cause, that will in a way change their attitude. Indeed, I did reach out beyond the Ministry of Foreign Affairs to other ministries, someone who is way more conservative than the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. They are the one usually lashing the court at the back. But they after understand, at least they will understand what we're doing. At least they don't perceive us as a threat. I think that's already a success. Even there are different dynamics within the authorities, not only in the Communist Party, but also the government. Everyone have different interests. I think that's the same within every government, even with the Netherlands government, with the Dutch authorities. The work we do will be received differently among the different audience. That's all natural. But I think one of the reasons why the ministry is so supportive to us, which surprised me, is I'm trying to rationale it again. So is that they always have to explain what the court is about, what is the cause. They are the one always to clear the confusion. So it's very good. We're the one doing this job now. If you want to have a community support the international justice, it's not enough you have some academics. It's not enough to have some state officials. You also need a very vibrant civil society who can elaborate on those issues, who can advance their agendas, who really believe in those things. I think that's the strength we have for now. I hope I answered all of your questions. The second question on the cultural challenge. You're right. The culture can be a big scapegoat or douchebag, whatever you call it. Everyone takes out different things from it. I believe I was citing this quote that the penalty does not go up to the Mandarins because domestically, if you're aware of, there are such discussions now in China with regards to Mr. Zhou Yongkang, whether a standing committee member of the Chinese Communist parties can be prosecuted in a court of law. What I understand, I'm not a very big expert on that, the Chinese domestic politics, but what I understand is if you reach to the standing committee of the Chinese Communist parties, which is the highest authority in China, you are in a way immune from prosecution of the court. You can only be punished, let's say, not prosecuted by the party itself. That for me shows that the principle I was citing, the penalty does not go into the highest mandarins, is prevailing, even though there's another saying that the princes also have to be punished. That's the first question. That's the first answer. The second layer I was saying, I was citing this is this saying. You're right. This saying does not mean that the punishment itself does not go into the state officials or the mandarins. It's more the stigma attached to the punishment shouldn't go up to them. But that's exactly what the ICC is all about. When you're prosecuting the head of the states, the stigma or the shame itself is absolutely overwhelming already. Just putting someone in jail in Scheveningen Beach for 20 years itself, relatively, it's not such a serious punishment, I think. So I will answer your question. The last one, what are the Chinese audience in China? That has been the mission I've tried to find out as well. I think in most of other countries, what I understand is there are 4 different layers, 4 different audience. There are officials, there are academics, there are journalists, and civil societies. we tried to have, last year International Justice Day, we tried to have an event devoted to the civil society in China to bring together everyone who is interested in international criminal court from the civil societies. We did manage to put together a crowd of 40 people. But what I observed is the civil society is not yet there. They don't understand first what is international justice, and the most importantly, I shouldn't say they don't understand what international justice. I should say more accurately it should be they don't have a very good understanding of international justice, and more damaging is not many people understand how they can make a difference in their cause. So I would say the audience in China will be more the officials, the academics, including the students, and the journalists. Of course, at the back, that will be the public, the general public and mass. This year, we're trying to have an event, the International Criminal Justice Day, on July 17th. Again, that is devoted to this year event is devoted to the journalist and media circle. We're trying to explain why there are different tribunals, what are the roles of different tribunals, how do they function independently from each other, what is their independent mandate, and also trying to build up a contact with them, so when they're later reporting, they won't show the footage of International Court of Justice when they're trying to report issues of International Criminal Court. Yes, I hope I answered your question in that.
Anybody else? Yes?
Thank you for your presentation. I have a remark. I think the most important reasons that prevent states from signing the Rome Statute is, of course, that they are afraid that the head of state can be prosecuted, and the other reason, which is similar to the cultural reason, is the legal isolation of the country. I think, I'm not sure of the case of China. It's not member of any international jurisdiction, supranational jurisdiction, like the European Court of Human Rights. So this can explain also that the country is afraid from the supranational judicial control. It applies also to United States, which are now they are not a member of the Rome Statute, and the legal isolation of the legal system of a state, which is not very open to the international law and international judicial control, can explain that the states are consider themselves as autosuffisant. I don't know how to explain it in English. They don't want to be open to international justice.
Right.
Anybody else? Yes, sure.
Sure.
Whoever.
Yeah, okay. I'm Garrett, we spoke earlier for the Association of Defense Counsel at the CIICJ. I have two questions, actually, if you don't mind. First one being, when you talk about the prospects, specifically with regard to the fourth section on the moral high ground, you seem to share the opinion, as you mentioned earlier on in the discussion, that the ICC, in theory, is a very strong institution. However, when sort of having the caveat towards the end of your speech, you demonstrated that the ICC, that you need to show that the ICC is doing a good job in the world. However, recent court cases do demonstrate a lot of flaws within the actual practice of the ICC. So to what regard do you actually see, would you actually think that it is possible to demonstrate that the ICC in theory is still positive when practice might like demonstrate something in the other direction? Second question that I wanted to ask, if you don't mind, is there any sort of domestic or demonstrations of support for any other international tribunals which would at least demonstrate a sort of appreciation for international authority, whereas at least that would give some sort of grounding for international justice in theory as opposed to just the ICC, if that makes sense?
Can you repeat your question? I'm sorry, I didn't get
the second one.
Yeah, the second one.
Yeah, let me try to reword that as well because it didn't make sense as I was saying it. Is there, if we're trying to appreciate from a Chinese perspective the idea of international justice in theory, Is there any sort of domestic support for other tribunals, the ICTR, the ICTY, STL, that would demonstrate at least an appreciation for the idea that this is possible, therefore a sort of launching platform, if you will?
Maybe your question, and then Michael can give answers.
Thank you. Thank you for your excellent presentation. I wanted to continue on the earlier remark about state parties to the statute. There's the Comprehensive Testament Treaty, which has not yet entered into force. Various states have not ratified it. There's an annex which specifies which states need to ratify it before it enters into force. And among these states are the United States and China, for example. And analysts expect that as soon as the United States would ratify the treaty, or very soon after, that it is expected that other states under Annex 2 which have not ratified it will follow, among which China. Now this treaty is clearly in China's strategic interest, let's say, because it would create a certain parity, or at least freeze parity, the strategic balance between states.
I'm sorry, which treaty are you referring to?
The Comprehensive Testament Treaty. Now, if we compare this with the Rome Statute, where you say that it is not really in China's interest, which implies that it does not really conflict with it either, so there might be some room for them to join. What are the prospects of China joining the Rome Statute in the event, hypothetical event, that in the United States the domestic politics allow it for them to ratify it? How would be the prospect of China joining in?
Sorry, I didn't understand your question.
So what are the prospects of China joining this Rome Statute when the United States ratify the Rome Statute?
What you were saying about the comprehensive ban treaty?
No, about the Rome Statute.
About the Rome Statute, of course.
Yeah, I draw the analogy with the comprehensive because there it is expected they will join.
Okay, understood. Okay,
First, if I can also comment on your remark on this legal isolation thing. But the question is still, which one comes first? Is the legal isolation comes first, or the cultural isolation comes first? Because you have a cultural isolation, so you don't want to join other organizations, and hence it makes worse. Or the other way around, you can join and the culture will go away. I agree, like this legal isolation is one of the contributing factors that China distanced itself from the Rome Statute, and I think it's changing little by little. At least China is now submitting to the economic jurisdictions, the WTO and others. That is something cheerful, and I think gradually understand that the jurisdiction of international relations is not something so fearful. That might be a good starting point, even though money is really different from the criminal prosecutions. On the second, you have two questions. The first one, if I understand correctly, is with the growing flaws or alleged flaws of the ICC's practice, was that good enough to assure that ICC is on the moral high ground? That indeed is one of the points the representatives of China raised in last year's ASP of ICC with regards to Kenya's situation. But the question I need to ask is, what is the comparison benchmark? So what you are comparing with? If you're comparing with Saddam Hussein's trial, maybe it's doing a good job already. If you're comparing to some of the domestic trials, I think it's also doing proper jobs. Yes, there are rooms to be improved, but I don't think that's something fatal to ICC at the current stage. And I also think, in line of that thinking, there should be more Chinese participation, even to discuss on those flaws. How can those flaws to be changed, rather than staying as a third person and making the accusations that ICC is not doing good enough and distance itself from. In the end, it's still an international organization, a very important one. And if you're a big power, I think the state policy should be more constructive. The second question on ICTR and ICTY, launching platform. It's impossible to distinguish ICC, to isolate ICC from the broader picture of international criminal justice. The moral foundation, the reasons to have all those tribunals are correlated with each other. And we are also monitoring, when we're monitoring International Criminal Court, we're also monitoring other tribunals and share the prospects with other peoples. But the difference is ICTR and ICTY. I think they are less of international politics because they are trying their history, trying something happened in the past, while ICC is looking forward. When it comes to the strategic, I think that you need to distinguish when you are having a panel, when you're having an audience, someone who is quite expert on these issues. You're trying to separate them. But if you're targeting the journalists or the publics, I think you're right. You can launch them together. The comparison between U.S. and China. Every conference I go in China, people will discuss the United States position. Everyone. This is getting annoying. Sometimes the U.S. is not concerned at all, but still China is looking at what the U.S. is doing. And for example, I participated in the arms trade treaty negotiation. The United States wasn't interested at all, but China is always what the U.S. is doing, and asking, and then from there to see how they will behave or forge its positions. I think it will be the same when it comes to the Rome Statute, when it comes to the International Criminal Court. U.S. is not likely going to join the Rome Statute in the near future. That's everyone has been telling me. I'm not an expert on that. But what the U.S. is doing towards the court is something China should learn from. My perspective, my opinion. The U.S. turned away from objecting the court, to supporting the court, providing rewards for the fugitives, arresting the fugitives. Also providing intelligence to the court. I think that's something China should learn from, even though you're not going to join the court, but it is in your interest to support the institution. And that goes to my second prospects, that with Chinese diplomacy going sophisticated, increasingly sophisticated, I think there will be more chance that these two are going together. China will take ICC as more relevant in the future.
Thank you, Michael. Maybe one or two last questions, if somebody is interested. No? Well, I wanted to thank you very much, Michael, for your time and your excellent presentation.
It's a pleasure.
Thank you to everybody for coming tonight and passing on the football tonight, so thank you very much for that. There will be another SCL lecture next week, same place, same time. You can find flyers on the table next to the door. So thank you very much again.